across to me as somebody who's kind of, through the family you've grown up in, through the city you've grown up in, and then your travels, be it to Japan or the arts you collect, all of them have had such strong influences on you. And somehow you've managed to carry those values that stayed with you to your practice as well. Something I think we aspire to do, but because the context is different, that's often a struggle for us to juxtapose that there. Essentially, through my questions now, I'm going to try and understand how you did that. But that's really the goal of this conversation of it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully I have answers to those questions.
I'm not worried about that. So you actually, at a very young age, were made the head of business development at the firm you were working at. Could you share some of what sparked your interest in business development itself, because which is often a sort of odd interest choice for most architects? And how did you approach the client relationship when you probably were not trained for it at all? What was your approach?
Yeah. That's amazing. You know that. I mean, that's amazing that you know that, because I had almost forgotten it. Well, I grew up with two incredible parents that really did love each other. And so when you grow up with such a strong ethical foundation, it grants you many things. And one thing it gave me is a sincere interest in people and relationships. And as much as I love to put my head down and to sketch and draw and find it almost meditative in a way, it's just such a beautiful thing to take a piece of paper and place a line on it. There is something about it that's a oneness. And so I think at that time in my career, I was extremely interested in the process of building relationships to a degree that you would be hired, that someone would entrust you with one of the most important investments they make, which is hiring an architect to design a city, a place, a building, and realizing that there was a tremendous complexity to that there's an art form to it. And I'm not sure we figured it out to this day. I think the older I get, the more I realize it's about a relationship. And although there's a business side of that relationship, it's about developing trust and about granting someone access to who we are in a business, from a business perspective, from the perspective of art, from an investment perspective. And so I was just intrigued with that, expressed an interest in it with that previous firm. And they said, well, why don't you head up our business development? And of course, it's kind of like the dog that chases the car. What do you do once you get it, right? You're not sure. And but I was put in that position, and I enjoyed a little of success. It's the toughest part of the business, I believe. Gaining the trust of an individual or an institution and convincing them that of all the architects out there, you are the right choice.
All right. And Trey, moving on, like after working at this firm, at some point you decide that you're going to head off on your own and start your own firm. At that sort of juncture, what was some of the, I know it's making you travel back in time, but what were the initial challenges that you faced? So, I mean, architecture is something you were trained at. You were also clearly gifted at. Again, business development is something you honed further at while you were there. But there were just some challenges that you would be faced as a firm owner. What were some of those initial challenges that you were put forward against?
Yeah, I think that most clients believe the difference between ordinary and extraordinary in architecture is about an extraordinary site or an extraordinary and unique program, or an extraordinary or unlimited money. Mm-hmm. And I didn't buy that. I believe that the most basic, maybe at times, maybe the ugliest sight, maybe a context that is not lavish in terms of views and climate. Maybe it's the poorest of neighborhoods, that embedded in these places that are more typical than not are extraordinary opportunities. And it's not about money, it's about caring deeply, it's about feeling, it's about interrogating this place in so many ways that you unearth something that's embedded in the culture, the history, the cuisine, the climate, the soil that gives rise to something that feels incredibly authentic to that place or this time and place. And so early on, it was about convincing a client that this type of journey was not going to cost any more from a fee perspective, nor a building perspective. It was just about a process and caring and seeking to create something that felt so rooted in that place. And I think what it did cost the client was time, because it's a process where you absorb and take in information, but you have to have that reflective period of stepping aside, of almost stepping away from all of the complexity of those issues to think about what are the many ways that we can respond to these conditions to create something that I think contributes significantly to humanity. And I think that's what we've created in the firm, a group of individuals, a small community that believe we do contribute importantly to society. And that's about giving so much of ourselves in so many ways. And although, quite frankly, it's extremely painful at times, I think it's worth it. It's what we're called to do when we're given the gift of life.
Mm-hmm. And I'm just intrigued, Trey, in this part, like, were you always successful in communicating this to what you say is clients? Why I ask is, again, oftentimes the way it's kind of portrayed to us is clients are these profit-driven companies that don't speak the same language as you do. Did you always feel you had that vocabulary to communicate just those things? I mean, now when we look up the website of Trahan Architects, you've coined concepts like rootedness. That's probably something you've learned over time. But when you were starting off, was that vocabulary something that came naturally to you and to be able to communicate it?
Yeah, absolutely not. The vocabulary wasn't there, but I'm going to go back to my upbringing. I trusted that I could share what I felt deep within, and that people and that others were going to respect, that I chose to be raw and share something very personal as a way of building a relationship with the client, one of trust, hopeful that they would equally feel respected, to the degree that they would share something that they would not typically feel comfortable sharing. And later on, it was explained to me by a good friend when I asked what I said to him once at breakfast. I said, "What's this about?" This was actually a client. And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Life." And he said, "This is about trust." And he said, "This is about granting someone access to who you are hopeful that they'll do the same. And when we do that, we feel we develop a level of safety and security, and then we have the opportunity to share even deeper and more meaningful things about ourselves and our lives that that can contribute to a meaningful relationship and hopefully a meaningful life. But no, I did not have the words, and I quite frankly, it's an interesting question because I still feel shackled by the inability to express what I want to say to others, or I feel it, but it's hard to express it in terms of words. And so I think I choose to express it in how we intervene in any ecology or any landscape, because that's terribly important, right? When you choose to make any level or any type of intervention in an urban ecology, in a rural ecology, in any place, it might be forever, or it will be forever impacted. And so that decision comes with tremendous responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, Trey, again, coming from that, this is again trying to get you back in time. It's kind of a more logistical question in this aspect that, again, when you're starting off, you really don't have the luxury of saying no to the projects coming your way. But you were, again, somebody who showed that you were always through and through, right from the beginning, quite aware of what your design aspirations were while saying yes to what was coming your way. How did you, in sort of actionable, practicable ways, what strategies did you employ to manage this sort of diverse workload so that you don't lose track of where you're wanting to head at while doing things that are necessary maybe at the time?
Yeah. You're right. I did have strong thoughts and feelings and views about what is proper, what has integrity. And I believe that, well, I don't believe I know, that if I could slow the client's desire to move quickly down, that the conversations, that what was shared, whether it was walking a site, whether it was going to other buildings, other projects, or talking about art, sculpture, paintings, the mood, the atmosphere of something, that if I could buy enough time to have so many meaningful conversations, that one, they'd trust me, two, they'd know that what I was saying, that I'm passionate about it, that it's real to me, that I'm not playing. And although I might laugh about it at times, I'm very serious about it. And so I tried to buy that time. I tried to find ways to share both the beautiful things that occurred in my life and the not so beautiful things. And that allowed me to talk about the warmth of a material, the beauty of how the unique climatic conditions of a place can age and patina something in a way no other place on the planet. And that's nature's way of painting or shaping. And that the beauty of that is its high degree of unpredictability. And in that is where the mystery lies. And in that lies something that touches us deep inside that nothing else can. And so I always knew that if I had time, I could share where that little piece of copper or bronze set adjacent to another material would age and streak and create a condition that was just stunningly beautiful. And that was my way of sharing what beauty meant to me. But it was not really about what beauty was to me. It was about an attempt to understand how the client, as an individual, as a group, defined beauty. And so it was that search of what touches you, what is so meaningful to you, what creates that moment in life where you almost gasp for air because you're so taken back by something. And so it was always that search, and hopeful that they would go on this journey with me. And I'll never forget one client. And once he selected us, he called me up and he said, "Trey, can you come see me?" And I drove over and was sitting there, and he said, "Now look, what I love about your approach is there was no defined destination. You want to go on a journey, and you want to go on a journey with me and the client group." And he said, "I'm open to this. In fact, I embrace this, and I'm right there with you." But he said, "There's only one thing I will not accept, and that is a cast-in-place concrete building." We built a cast-in-place concrete building. It was the most interesting process because one night at 11 o'clock at night, he called me and he said, "I just can't do it." And we had this conversation at least a handful of times where he said, "I don't understand, Trey. You've never built a cast-in-place concrete building. Why is it so important? Why do you think that's so appropriate here?" And we would revisit all of the conversations we had before. But I really was exhausted. And I finally said to him, I said, "Okay, tomorrow we'll start over, and it will not be a cast-in-place concrete building." And he paused, and it seemed like 10 minutes of quiet. And then he said, "Okay, we'll build it out of concrete if you think it's right." And it turned out glorious. But it was that journey just of feeling and caring and knowing that that choice would have a significant impact on this group of people. And, we must also think about, we always talk about the act of building, but I think we have to think of our buildings as ruins. What's it going to be like 500, 1,000 years from now, which is equally as beautiful as a state of expression, of experience. And so the choice of materials is important in that regard, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, Trey, I think you actually at some point in one of the interviews highlighted the importance of attracting young, new graduates, talented graduates to your firm. My question would be, what do you think, now that you're like 30 plus years down with your firm, was effective in attracting and retaining this kind of talent?
I don't know if it's this, but I hope it's this. I hope I'm a risk taker. And I'm a risk taker that I'll take risk in a business investment. I'll take risk in designing something that there are many unanswered questions. I'm willing to take many risks, knowing that it's probably the only chance. If you don't take significant risk, there's a limit to what you learn, there's a limit to what you experience, and there's a limit to the level of gratification that you deserve. And as I am grateful for this call with you, we want to be grateful at the end for the experience, for the relationship with our colleagues, our clients, our consultants, our community. And I think elevating the levels of risk results in having a much higher level of gratitude. I am in no way critiquing, but there are firms out there that know the materials they're going to use, its expression. They know of the 1,000 questions we ask, 950 of those are answered when they start. Well, that's not how we practice. And there's something about that I think mirrors life, right? We all woke up this morning and stock markets around the world are plunging. And in that, wealth is being lost. But if you're patient and grateful, it will come back and we're going to be fine. We're going to be fine. And we're reminded today of how fragile life is in so many ways. We're reminded of how fragile relationships are, and we're reminded to cherish them. And so I hope that one thing that attracts young talent to the firm, and we can always be better at this, to be candid, is you look at our work and each one is different, right? We're finishing up a small chapel out of brick. I don't think we've ever done a building out of brick, and I've been practicing for 30-something years. That's crazy. And brick is so beautiful. And so I hope it's that they arrive at the office every day and you're not quite sure where the journey is going to take you. But it's going to be one with integrity, in search of beauty, one that of tremendous commitment to doing it right and getting it built correctly. And I hope that's what it is. I'm going to give that additional thought because it's a great question.
You coined the term rootedness on your website. You speak about it. Could you elaborate a little on that and how that concept kind of then seeps into the way you run your firm, the choices you make at your firm?
Yeah. Well, look, as I was graduating from college, the computer and technology was taking over. And it appeared that you could create something kind of sexy and interesting, but that it could be anywhere for anyone, for any program. And to me, that just lacked an authenticity to it. And so the question became, what is embedded in each commission that can give birth to something that results in respect for the client, for the site, for the program, for for all of humanity? And so for us, we just started building on it. And we said, and then when I started studying maps of watersheds, I became intrigued with where's the origin of the water and what is it carrying with it from one place to another. And of course, one thing that it's carrying are the seeds. And so thinking about the seeds and the soil and what seeds are over here that the watershed brings with it, and what seeds then begin to grow and populate and create unique agrarian conditions in this place, and then what seeds are moved in that watershed from one watershed to another for medicinal purposes, and then others for textiles, and then you start thinking about. Then we learned of what ethnobotanists do, and they taught us that they could through research and through their expertise provide us with the seed types that the earliest settlers 500 to 1,000 years back grew in this place. And then we realized that, that's a form of rewilding a place. And that rewilding doesn't have to be limited to a rural place. You can rewild an urban environment. And rewilding doesn't mean growing things. Rewilding can be, like Tanizaki said in the early 1900s, talked about the editing out artificial light. Rewilding can be natural light. So rewilding can be internal to a space. And so for me, all these things began to develop into our ethos of rootedness. How do these things give birth to something that that in some ways instantly confirms this is of place and time, and in other ways over time reveals that there's layers of connections to people from hundreds of years past that we're connecting to, and hopefully we're doing it with tremendous humility, but with tremendous dignity. And so we're still asking those questions of what does it mean with AI and all of the past? What does it mean to kind of collide these things? Are there things, or I guess what I'm saying, and now I'm asking the question is, what is lost in becoming modern, in becoming contemporary, that we need to reach back and bring forward with today's technology and begin to think about how these things now can have a unique relationship that was not possible before, that may give rise to a different way of intervening in any ecology.
Yeah. And so, Trey, this is just like a question that's coming out of what you spoke to just now. In that process, how do you go about it in ways that I would imagine documentation in any form was far sparse then? It was more sort of just a lived experience. How do you find yourself extracting that wealth of knowledge that existed? Because I mean, right now, maybe past 10 years, I can Google it online and find it. How do you think it's more experienced, or you spend time with those? How do you do it for yourself?
I think you have to. I think you have to Google it. I think you have to. I think you have to go down that rabbit hole, so to speak. But I also think you have to. I think you have to spend an enormous amount of time in a community, on a site, during the different seasons, during tremendous, during the heat of summer, during the cold of winter. I think you have to bring every app you can find and take pictures of every plant and identify that plant type. I think you have to bring the app out there that identifies every bird type. I think you have to use all of this technology and just absorb all you can, because there's so many layers of information that contribute to experience of a place that that is, for me, is about what living's about. It's what beauty is. I mean, it's incredible when. Look, I'll share a story. We bought a plantation, and we're very much aware of the period of enslavement. It's very different to walk that plantation when it's 50 and 60 degrees outside than to walk it when it's 100 degrees and 99% humidity, and walk through that barren field and think about that enslaved person, and think about that enslaved person knowing that site is about seeing and being seen. In other words, who is watching that enslaved person? And what does that mean to be watched? And what does that mean to be watched under those environmental conditions with that degree of temperature, right? That to sweat and to feel that heat, and to know even beyond the heat is the pressure of knowing that you are shackled to that site, to that place, to the demands and requirements. You don't feel that unless you take the time, and we will never understand it, but you have to take the time to go walk that field during the extreme heat of summer and feel that and know that is the best we can do at trying to understand those conditions. And so I think spend an enormous amount of time on site and in the community beyond the site, because let's face it, there are so many things that influence the site beyond the site. For this plantation, it was the Mississippi River, the low soils, these soil types, so many things. The period where the indigenous people lived on this land. So yeah, I think it's research. I think it's documentation, as you mentioned, but I think it's personal experience, and I think it's personal experience that you share with others, hopeful that the optics and experience of others will allow you to see it from the point of view outside of yourself.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that story again, Trey. I think there was, I don't know how to explain it. It's really just the experience that you say. I think I can speak for myself. I think when we've gone to a place that you've spoken about it before in terms of respecting all scales of life, and I think everything that you do when you're present in a place, that is essentially what you seem to be practicing, and a lot of us are missing. So thank you for sharing how powerful that is, just kind of realizing to truly be in a space.
Yeah.
I want to kind of go into client communication with you, and I want to break it up in two bits. The first bit would be in terms, you speak extensively about expectation management. And I want to, if you could get your thoughts on what does it mean to kind of communicate these complexities and manage client expectations through a project? What are those factors that you kind of lay out and have seen yourself that draws transparency between the two stakeholders? That's one. And the second one, that if you could speak to, again, like you speak about client relationships, you take away the sort of daunting pressures that come with the words like networking and client relationship building, but you talk about creating real relationships. How do you go about doing that, especially post a project? Is I'm interested in learning about that.
Say that again, especially when?
Post a project, like a project's complete, but how do you maintain that relationship? How does that happen for you? Yeah.
Yeah. Client expectations, that's everything. It's so important. What we did not do originally, where we have failed early on, is we did not, in the early years, I did not fully understand that when you attempt to innovate, let me start here. That is less innovative, that's using traditional means of building, a contractor's ability to estimate it as far as cost and building time is much easier because he's done it before, and so have each of the subcontractors, right? When you attempt to innovate and there are an increased number of unknowns, the only way you get to a place where the subcontractors and general contractors can put cost and time required to build down and feel comfortable and feel safe is to develop the drawings to a certain point, right? You have to go through that process to get here. when we started out, we would do that, and we were inherently over budget. But we built into our business model the cost of knowing we were going to have to tweak and redraw things after we had benefited from the subcontractors and contractors' cost. And so you have to go through that. Early on, we didn't explain that to clients that, look, we're going to push, we're going to attempt to innovate. And the result of that is we're going to get the cost and the schedule. And it's not going to be a simple straight line journey. We're going to get to that point and we're going to have to redo some things because we're going to learn so much from that process. That's the difference between a successful relationship and a relationship that is strained between the architect and the client. And so now we start off by saying, look, what do you like about our work? Why are you here? And inevitably, it's how each project is rooted in the unique conditions of their program, their site, their institution, or their family, etc. And then we explain, this is our process. And we're going to shoot for the greatest value for the dollar. And so we have to go down this path of drawing and obtaining this information to then shift and change and redraw some things, redo some of the specs to get it in budget and to meet your schedule. And that makes for a much more enjoyable process. But I think you have to share that day one, and you have to just be fully transparent and say, do you have the time to go down this type of path? Now, the nice thing is that we can add people to a project and make up any lost time, and we can end up on time. But I think it's about being very transparent about, some would say, the complexity of process when you're pushing. It's what I love and what I find exciting, because what you learn is significant. And so it brings tremendous joy to me. And I think my colleagues in the office and our consultants, and I think the client, because they know that they've participated in a process that is not applicable only to architecture, but any form of creating. And it's about asking so much of ourselves and each other. So I think that's part of it. It's being transparent day one. Post, I think it's about, it's interesting to watch a client take ownership of a space in a building. And there were preconceived ideas about how they would furnish it, how they would live in it. And then it's quite beautiful to watch them see and feel and absorb things that only living in that space, celebrating in that space, being with oneself in that space, alone in that space, or being with groups in a space. You have to do that. And so I love returning and having conversations that reveal that there were moments that they thought they understood, but they didn't. And quite frankly, there are moments that as architects we thought we understood. But like when sun enters the aperture, some opening in a building, whether it's in a wall or a roof or cored through a column or a beam or something, and penetrates that space and activates that space in a way that's just totally unpredictable. That's a wonderful moment to see the joy a client gets from knowing that they were part of that, of creating that experience. And so I love returning. Of course, as an architect, the most immediate things we often see are the things we wish we would have done better, right? Because we always can. And so we remain our harshest critics. But I think both of these questions go back to where we started this conversation, and that is being really open and honest and transparent with each other, and not fearing that the critique of a client, which you hope you receive. Yeah, I think it's bringing to the relationship an openness and honesty, so that the client feels that they are always in a place to share what's most important, what they're truly seeking to achieve in the commission, in the building. Because also to return where we started, most clients don't have the vocabulary, and it's hard to find the right choice of words to express. I mean, I can't imagine how a client feels trying to share what they want their home to be, their family's dwelling. When you don't have the words, because we often use terms that are associated with materials or colors, and we don't speak of the atmosphere of a space, how it feels, how we feel in that space. I always, in recent years, I've strongly encouraged clients to read Kanasaki's In Praise of Shadows, because I think it's such a powerful piece that speaks to a simpler way of living that I hope we arrive at a place where we will enjoy the benefits of all this technology, but that it will be woven beautifully with much simpler times. Hopeful that it kind of keeps society grounded in ways that we seem to have lost. Yeah.
I'm going to have to find that piece too. Thank you for sharing that. Is that something you share with all your clients now? When they
This book? Yeah. Have you ever seen it? So it's a Japanese 1930s In Praise of Shadows. It's a video. You should watch it. And after you watch it, you must call me and let's talk about it. It's it's about what I think it's about what I mentioned earlier about, we always speak of what we've gained in contemporary life and modern life. But I think it's also important to identify what we've lost. And some of the things we've lost, that's a good thing. Some of the things we've lost, maybe we need to return to. And I think that's an important question that we quite often fail to ask. What has been lost that we should return to, or that we should reach back and bring forward? Because to me, that's what's most exciting. All of this new technology, but weaving it with things of the past that are just, for example, this one piece of land we're working on, we hired an ethnobotanist. He identified 120 seed types that the indigenous people and others have been growing on this land 1,000 years back. He said, these seeds are for medicinal purposes. These are culinary. These are textiles. He said, but more important, these seeds will grow. These seed types host the larva of this type of butterfly. These are attractive to snails. These are attractive to, dragonflies. And he said, but these will develop roots 15 feet deep. And in that, the water filtration process will be off the charts on this land if you plant these seeds. And then the carbon sequestration will be off the charts. So all of a sudden, in planting and rewilding this site and thinking about what can we plant here that can be part of the architecture, we're talking about healing the site as it relates to water, healing the site as it relates to air, healing the site as it relates to biodiversity. I mean,
that's fascinating.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I think that's where we as architects, I mean, look, I love when we choose to think and feel deeply the experiences we can have. And I think as architects, we need to think about this rewilding and planting these things. And so the site isn't the intervention of just pouring concrete or wood beams or shingled roofs or plasters or bricks. The site is as much a part of the landscape. It's ecology. It's a holistic ecology, right? And all these things contribute to the experience of the site, the atmosphere of the site. And I hope that more and more architects reach out to more landscape architects and ecologists and ethnobotanists and all these brilliant consultants that just can take the work to a far more beautiful place.
I think you talk about how your father had a great influence in terms of he was a geologist himself, but would always seek different business opportunities, and then spoke about how those profits could impact communities and societies depending on what the opportunities were. My question would be for yourself, are there certain criteria when you invest in a piece of art or in anything that you invest in? Are there criteria that you use to evaluate for yourself the potential impact of it? How do you evaluate that for yourself?
Yeah. Well, I think I have to start by saying, admittedly, I started off pretty self-absorbed, and that's an empty journey, right? I mean, sure, there are things, the most basic things we get up and we work on and we strive for daily for ourselves, and I think that's a good thing. But I think when you realize the importance of contributing to community, and that becomes your definition of beauty, there's a shift, right? You just start thinking differently. Admittedly, I bought this plantation. It has an 1808 house on it. I thought I would restore it and live in it. Within a few months of buying it, I was talking with my staff and encouraging them to challenge me, and it just so happened one day that one colleague challenged me on a day that I had just returned from the plantation and realized the racial complexity of communities and the need for me as a white privileged person to make choices that could contribute to those who were less fortunate. And so it's been an incredible 4 years to to make choices, for example, like removing all the invasive species, the trifoliate orange and the Chinese privet. That teaches you something as an architect. To plant the meadows, as I just mentioned, to bring in some of the world's top paint conservators to take literally hundreds of samples of materials in the house and identify what the composition of the earliest paints were and what they tell us about the indigenous people that were in this, that inhabited this land, or the enslaved. And I think all that interest, although my father, he was a geologist, and although he didn't practice, I think in some ways, the way his passion for land and soil and the agrarian world in Crowley, Louisiana, where I grew up, was instilled in me, and his, but also, quite frankly, his faith that taking risk was always going to end up okay. That he would say, sometimes we win some, we lose some, but in the end, we win them all, and it's true. You learn so much when you take risk, and the journey that you anticipated is not realized at all. In fact, it's quite the opposite. And it's why I embrace taking risk. I find it exciting. It's what I did, and I'm still doing it today in building an art collection. And of course, I am nowhere collecting art at a very high level. But I decided to travel to Japan and meet with artists and understand their lives and understand the way they shape clay and what's meaningful to them. And the contributions are just enormous, right? When we choose to take a path that is very foreign to our present and past lives, the contributions can be overwhelming and really rich and beautiful. So yeah, Dad is a geologist. I think gave birth to my interest in the soil and the seeds. His curiosity about other businesses and why some businesses worked, why some didn't, why some failed. He came home one day and he said, "Look, we're going to build 1 million square feet of greenhouses and grow tomatoes." And my mom said, "What do you know about that?" And he said, "Nothing, but I met this man who does, and I trust him." And he did okay. He came home another day and he said, "Look, I bought a men's clothing store." And my father never made a lot of money, but he just had this interest in these different businesses. And I think maybe to a fault, I have some of that in me, because I'll walk in the office and say, "Why don't we do this?" And there's this strange look on the face of most of my colleagues. But I think in some ways it contributes to the business of architecture and also the art of intervening. That's what you're doing when you're creating a business. You're intervening in a community in a certain way. And in some ways, that's highly very unpredictable.
That's a beautiful way of putting it. I think you speak about the best advice you've received is to seek sort of a balance and a peaceful life. What I want to ask, Trey, especially, I think, so I attended the AIA conference this year that happened in DC, and we were doing some quick bites with some of the architects. Coincidentally, it was right after somebody called Arthur Brooks' talk, where he spoke about happiness. And I think it left everybody a little pensive, questioning about their personal, professional life. What I want to ask you, Trey, you, at least in the from this end of the spectrum, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like you've got it figured out. What I want to ask is, in terms of that, are there certain practices or habits that have helped you maintain that sort of balance, given the demanding nature of the profession you're in?
Yeah. I don't have it all figured out, but thank you for saying that. I do know this. How we feel about ourselves is extremely important. When we're unkind, you can't feel good about yourself. So kindness is critical, right? To be kind. And it's really special to be kind when someone's being unkind, right? To have that degree, that kind of depth and patience and dignity. So I think it's a search for being kind to ourselves and to others, and making every attempt to be unkind when life is not so kind. I know that where that takes me is into the fields, into the meadows, into the forest. What I absorb in that kind of natural place contributes significantly to me feeling more stable, more loved, more accepted, and having the ability to be kind to people. Because life is beautiful in so many ways, but it can be extraordinarily painful, right? And so for me, I am so drawn to people that exercise kindness. And that's in our choice of words, in our tone, in our eyes, in our facial responses, right? Because it's not easy. But I think it's important. And I think it's important to each of us professionally. How can you really create a beautiful experience for someone, a beautiful building, something that feels so appropriate to a place if you're unkind? Because that unkindness extends beyond personal relationships. So often, and I'm confident I've done this unintentionally, we're unkind to the environment. We're unkind to the planet. We're unkind in the way we build to our neighbors. How wrong can you go if you're thinking of others first, right? And candidly, I haven't always done that. But the older I get, the greater the commitment to that becomes. Because that's what gives you true joy, right? Yeah. And so I think kindness is an important part of being an architect, a landscape architect, an ecologist, an ethnobotanist, an interior architect, an interior designer. I think it's a part of, I think that is central. It's at our core where we must begin each project, each day. And I start there most days, but I don't always end there. But I think it's what we have. I think that's the bar. I think we have to work towards that. I think when you walked in a building that's beauty is it as much about its, well, you can feel that there was a core group that designed it, that possessed humility, that possessed kindness.
What was the last building that you walked into that you felt that?
I felt that at Grandchamp by Corbeau. I felt that in Louis Kahn's Kimball. Every time I visit the Kimball, I ask myself, will this building impact me the way it has the previous 20 times? And I always answer, I don't expect it to, and it always does. It's pretty extraordinary. Yeah. And yeah, there's something beautifully balanced about it. I think Tanizaki would be pleased with that building.
Okay.
I look forward to both of those buildings now that I think about it. And after you watch the video, I'd love to hear your thoughts about it.
I most definitely will.
All right.
Thank you so much. You have a lovely day ahead.
You too. Thank you so much. Talk soon.